In this episode of the Easy Hard versus Hard podcast, I'm pleased to bring Stacey Brake onto the show. Stacey is a powerhouse in the mental health, education, and emotional healing space. With over 2 decades of experience as a counselor, coach, and certified integrative healthcare professional, Stacey has helped thousands of professionals break free from anxiety, imposter syndrome, and self-sabotage to reclaim lasting peace. She's also the creator of Anxiety Detox, a practical, time-conscious online course designed specifically for high-performing individuals with full plates. Her approach blends deep emotional insight with holistic, science-backed strategies that actually work. Stacey's mission is clear: to help you heal past the wounds, release your limiting patterns, and step into a life full of joy and fulfillment. If you've ever felt stuck or believed anxiety is just who you are, Stacey invites you to suspend that belief because freedom is possible, and she's here to guide you there. Please enjoy this episode. I know I certainly did. All right. Welcome back to the Easy Hard versus Hard podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you find the work that actually matters in your life. Today is a very special episode because we're bringing on our first guest. I promised you guest, and today is the day. So I'd like to welcome to the show Stacey Brake. Stacey is a coach. I think you're located in North Carolina. I probably should have checked that before this, but she specializes in trauma, anxiety. Again, she can correct me on that if I'm wrong on that, but very, very insightful newsletter. I've learned a lot from her, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So, Stacey, the mic is yours. If you want to give yourself a better introduction than I probably just did, go right ahead, and welcome to the show.
Oh, I love this so much. Thank you so much for having me here. Just in our talks before we started to record, I already know this is going to be a blast, and we're going to dig into stuff that is going to be useful. So I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it, and really appreciate being the first guest. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I feel very cool right now. But yeah, so I do work with people who are struggling with anxiety, or which a lot of times specifically is coming from a specific trauma that they've lived with, they've carried, and so tends to be the source of their anxiety. Little background: I started in the mental health world a little over 20 years ago. Kind of I always say when I was, I was a baby counselor. When I started in that world, I worked at the rape crisis program local. So we dove straight off into the deep end and did, just really hard work. But also the blessing there was that I had such an incredible mentor and coach one-on-one who was helping me learn how to be with people in, the hard parts of their life, and how to sit without judgment and to walk people through that healing process. And so that's really where I got my start, and did a lot of different things in between: intensive in-home care, and worked as a school counselor for a while. And then in 2021, launched my own business. And I really focus on coaching now for a few reasons, but it just aligns for me. It just fits. And I really like the process. And I like, over the time, I've developed a system, somebody who really is, and I think a lot of people are like this. They look like they've got it together on the outside. They're successful. They've got a job, a lot of times a family, and nobody's looking at them going, they're not going to make it. We're worried about them. The people that I tend to work with are, the people that other people rely on, and so they come to me, and we're very targeted. We've got that specific thing that has been the thing that they're carrying that's just getting in the way of their more than anything, their joy, their presence, just peace. And once we work through that trauma healing process, they get on the other side and, you know, it's just everything feels lighter. Life is a little bit more comfortable. They're more present. They can wake up feeling a little more peaceful, a little more joyful. I always say we lower the baseline levels of anxiety, right? Everybody, if you were measuring all the time on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like overwhelmed, shut down mode, and 1 being perfect peace. Everybody kind of has a set point, a comfort zone, or what I call a familiar zone. And, you know, some people are very familiar with what it's like to be at a 6 or a 7 all the time. And, it doesn't have to be that way. And that's what we can do through this process. We bring that down to more like a 4 or a 3, or maybe you wake up at a 2, and even when life comes at you hard, that's going to fluctuate, right? But if you're starting at a 6 and it spikes, now you're at an 8 or 9 or a 10, versus starting at a 2 and something gets hard, it's still manageable. So in short, that's really where I find the most joy, is in the one-on-one work doing that. And then in groups and organizations, to be able to bring that in bigger scales is also very exciting. So that was a really long introduction. I hope that was helpful, but
No, that was wonderful. And as someone who personally has been on the side of anxiety and waking up, I don't know, I 7, 8, pretty much every day, working through that myself and finding that peace and joy is so valuable. So you're doing a great service to people, and I'm sure your methods are a little bit different than the way I went about it, but and that's my whole theory on all this, is that it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. And so I really would love to dig deep into some of the, share as much as you want, like take me through how you help someone get from, an anxious 7, 8. I mean, because we'll say 9 and 10 is complete shutdown, maybe panic attack. Is that accurate? Okay. So like just give me a couple simple tips that you found very helpful in your practice and along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, if somebody is at like 9, 10, and maybe even an 8, right, in that shutdown mode, I think the best thing is going to be co-regulation, right? To have another person physically present with you who's calm and able to bring their calming presence to like bring you down and help you manage. So that's what I would say there. And so for somebody who's high but not in that panic attack mode, what are we doing here? And that tends to be the people that I'm working with the most. When we're looking at it through like the trauma healing perspective, there's really 2 things that I believe need to happen. One is you need that deeper long-term healing. So when we talk about trauma, a lot of people have an idea of what that means. We first learned about it when we talked about PTSD for war veterans. But, a more simple definition is that trauma is really how your body, it's not what happened to you, right? Because 2 guys can go to war and one comes back traumatized and one does not, even if they've seen the same things or been through the similar things. So it's not about what happened to you. It's about how your body responds to what happened to you. And so when I talk about trauma or traumatic experiences, that's really what I'm saying, is how's your body reacting to something significant that happened in your life? It could be, war like that. It could be abuse. It could be a car accident. It could be a medical trauma, just having a really scary medical experience, a betrayal. So there's a ton of things that so many people go through, regardless of whether or not you had perfect parents and lived in a happy home and all these things. Like everybody at some point will face some challenges, and some of them become traumatic memories. And so the way that we gauge that is really, you know, if you think about it, if you think about that moment in time, the thing that happened to you, and your heart races, your stomach clenches up, your palms get sweaty, you have that physiological reaction as if you're living in that moment presently. You don't have the emotional distance from it. You're having physiological responses. Even if your brain is saying, I'm fine, this is not, an unsafe situation, right? Sometimes your body and your mind don't match up in that way. That is how I think of and define trauma. So we need to do two things. One, we need to do that inner healing work. The traumatic memory, rather than being stored in the brain, what we have learned over time, and I didn't learn this until I was, 10 years after I started work in mental health. Traumatic memories are just stored differently. They're stored in our body, which is why we have that physiological response. That's why we can't get the emotional distance. So we need to do the inner healing work for that. And that is kind of like the long-term solution. But also, people are living their lives right now, and they need something that's going to work here and now. And so when I work with people, that's what we're focusing on, those two sides of it. We're going to do that deeper long-term healing. It's going to take us 6 sessions. I use a practice called EMDR, which stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's called that because that was how it was first discovered and understood, that there was something about the eye movements back and forth that would give this calming effect. And somehow, even if you were thinking of something negative, like you felt calmer. So that was how Francine Shapiro discovered this. But so much more research has been done since then, and what we've learned is that the secret ingredient is the alternating bilateral stimulation, which just means, it's a lot of words, but all it means is taking turns on both sides with some sort of stimulation. So it could be the eyes moving, it could be an audio. So there are audio channels. Like Spotify has one that I love. It's called EMDR audio. You put in headphones and this calming music plays from left and then right. It kind of like the volume shifts between the two. And it gives you this really calming sensation. Or you can use tactile. So it could be tapping or a TheraTapper, which is going to give, you hold these 2 paddles in your hands and it gives you the vibrations. But it takes turns on both sides. And that alternating bilateral stimulation puts your brain into a state similar to REM sleep, where we go into processing mode. I always picture like a secretary, like you go to sleep at night and the secretary's there in your brain taking all the information, the data from the day and sorting it, right? This goes over here, this goes over here, this is this type of memory. We don't need this anymore, however, when we intentionally put your brain into that state through the alternating bilateral stimulation, you can go back and revisit those memories that have been stored in your body and reprocess them. So now you can move it to a place in your brain that gives you that emotional distance. It gives you that ability to move through it and not be trapped by it. So that's the long-term healing work. And on the other side, in the meantime, while we're going through that process, we always focus on a couple of strategies that are going to give you those quick wins. And I prefer to use things that are tied to neuroscience because it's going to work the first time and it's going to work every time. And it's going to be for anybody who is a human, because our biology is going to be the same in this way. So that's how I think of it. And
Mm.
I'll pause here and we can go into those strategies if you want, but does that give a big picture overview? Do you have questions from that?
I probably have more questions than listeners want to hear because I'm very interested in the human brain. And so let me ask a couple maybe dumb questions or elementary style questions. Like when you're doing this and you're taking the brain out of that state, is it kind of taking the brain out of its protection mode? Because I know you said it's going to heal, and obviously a lot of anxiety that I felt and others I've discussed, anxiety goes away when you sleep. Is and I know from my research into the brain is there to protect you. So if you have a trauma or an experience, your brain is like, hey, Bobby, you can't do this, or you need to start stressing because last time you did this, it was terrible for you, or you remember. Is that kind of what this stimulates, or am I way off base on that?
I love that so much. You know, I think the full process, right? That is the ultimate goal, right? To let you not be in protection mode so much, right? And part of what has to happen there is, your body is, tied to your limbic system, right? It's tied to that lizard brain or however you want to think of it. And it has one job, right? And that is survival. And that is why there can be so much intensity with those traumatic memories because it's stored in your body. And so we need to get you into a state where you can move that, right? We're moving it from being stored in your body to your brain where you can say, okay, I am safe here. This is okay. Even if, right, sometimes it's not about like tricking yourself into believing everything's going to work out just the way that I have it pictured in my head, right? Like I'm going to picture it fine, I'm going to show up and nothing's going to go wrong. That's a false sense of hope. A more solid state is I can do hard things, right? I can handle what comes to me. And part of that is shifting those emotions, being able to have more confidence in yourself because of that, because you're not being triggered, right? So we're removing those triggers. And then the second part of it is really, for a lot of people who have spent so much time feeling anxious, that's their familiar zone. So it may not be a comfort zone. It may not be comfortable to be at a 6 or 7 all day and to be, on all the time, but it's familiar. And if you take that away, if you bring somebody down to like now you're at a 3 and that's not familiar, we're going to sabotage that as quickly as possible, right? Because we can't, we don't trust that feeling, right? That's the last time I felt this way, the rug got pulled out from under me. The last time I thought everything was fine, it just went sideways. And so we have to, part of the EMDR process is first building that sense of peace and safety, reprocessing the traumatic memories, and then finally, thinking through what's next. What do we replace that with, right? You take this out or you change this. What goes in the place of it, right? If you're not waking up anxious and doing anxious behaviors all day long, like what do you do instead of that? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense to me, and it's so interesting to hear the science behind it because I came to it a lot differently, and I don't think I came from like a trauma that I can identify or anything. I think the trauma that I was creating was trauma in myself, and this was what I talk about repeatedly is that I was chasing other people's dreams and not meeting those ideals or getting there and then not being satisfied with that. So you talked earlier about small wins. But the real change for me was I read one time that all humans crave trust and safety. And a lot of this in mind was I wasn't giving myself either. I wasn't giving myself trust because I'd say I'd do something like, I'll be happy when. Well,
Mm,
the when happened and I didn't happen. So maybe I was creating my own trauma. Again, I don't want to step into that realm because it's not my expertise. But then the safety comes when you do realize, and what was very interesting when you said taking someone from a 6 or 7 and then taking them to a 3, it was a real transition, I know, for me and others, because you're hyped up all the time and you're stressed, and it gets to a point where even the way you calm yourself down is differently, where before a meditation may work well, or it didn't work, and now it's something else. And that's what's really cool, I think, about it. And again, I don't know this method so much, but is what I'm saying kind of on point? And I mean, you're obviously at a much a higher level than my simple brain way of dealing with it, but would that be a fair comparison?
yeah, and don't discredit your own experience, right? Because you know what you went through and what you lived through. And by the way, a lot of people have that experience of, is this all there is in life? I've set these goals in my mind, I've set these visions, and I've worked my butt off to get there. And thinking, right, like I'm going to be happy when, right, when we push put our happiness on these goals, we attach it to that, but we don't allow ourselves to feel the joy in between. Again, it's not familiar, so we get there, and what do? We immediately move the bar. We immediately look around for the next thing, and really are just moving from like one big goal to the next, and trying to figure out, like, how are we going to feel the joy, right? But it's never out there. It's never in these other experiences. But I think a lot of people, because of that, have built up anxiety, because you start to see that this pattern isn't changing, and I don't know how to get back to my joy. I don't know how to get to the creativity. Um, I've worked with men and women, but the most people tend to be women, and so many of them had said, um, "I've put myself last or not even on the list for so long. I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what is inside of me, or what I have that, to give." Um, and so I think that's a really common experience and thing. Thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of people will relate.
Yeah, and you bring up a very interesting part about putting yourself last, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, because I base my theory on the easy heart versus hard heart on self leadership, which is you lead yourself before you lead others.
Yeah.
And the key there is lead yourself. And in today's society and the way a lot of us are brought up, people use terms like selfish or whatever. The only time self seems to be acceptable now is when people say self-care. And self-care, and a lot of times, is just an escape. Self-care is a very valuable thing if you are using it to recharge or whatever. I'm not poo-pooing it, but I'm just saying that, like, sometimes maybe you do have to be selfish to get healing,
Hmm.
because if you don't heal yourself, how are you going to be there for others? How are you going to show up? In the Bible, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. How can you love someone else if you don't? How can you treat your neighbor if you don't love yourself?
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. How you don't even have that capacity. You don't even have that capacity. And I have found a lot of people struggle with taking that time to give themselves the healing, um, because of that lack of confidence and that lack of, like, self-worth, those kinds of things. But like the little kind of like backdoor hidden secret way to take that first step sometimes is saying that for yourself, right? Like, if I'm going to be a good mom, I need to do this healing. If I want my children to see a healthy marriage relationship, I have to do that work. I have to put that first, to be able to give that. So if this is what I desire to give, right? If I desire to be an amazing mom or partner or wife or husband or whatever, um, I got to do that work. And so I've found that some people, that's like the best they can reach for to start with. And I think that's good enough, right? Like whatever is going to get you in the door to do that healing work, even if you can't do it for yourself, you know, do it for that reason, knowing that you can't give this unless you do this for yourself.
Wonderful.
Which I don't know if that's a cheat, but that's
no. I mean, given that autonomy or that permission to yourself to heal, or at least take that first step. And I know as coaches, a lot of times we'll talk about action, and you and I are both believers in action, because inaction is fear, overthinking is fear. But you got to give yourself permission first. That's why so many people will say, I'm going to start my diet Monday, or I'm going to start it after the holidays. Well, why? I mean, give yourself permission today. And that doesn't mean you have to go. So many people, if they say they're going to start a diet or an exercise program, they compare themselves to, like, I like to say, like LeBron James or Michael Jordan, or so, why? And those people are at the top of their games. Maybe just if you're taking 3,000 steps, take 4,000 steps, and these baby changes. But again, doing that, and again, this goes back to trust and safety. If you say you're going to do it, Monday, let's just say that's what you're going to do, and I accept that as okay. You better do it Monday, because Tuesday is going to become harder. And so going back to your method, I love that you're giving someone immediate results, but then a long-term approach, because again, if someone wants to lose 20 pounds, we can cut their leg off. And I know that's cheeky, but it's like, that's not really what you want. You want the long-term effort. And same with healing of anxiety, I imagine, getting the short-term wins, as you call them, and then the long-term changes. But again, it all starts with permission.
It all starts with permission. And we all know comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison keeps us stuck. And so if you're comparing your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 30, you're gonna feel like, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to make it, right? And we think the only way is to throw everything out, start fresh, scrap it off. But the truth is, it's those small commitments to yourself that prove that you're worthy, that you're trustworthy, that you can count on yourself, that and those habits will compound over time. And so that's how you get to the chapter 30, right? But you got to start at chapter 1.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I'm sure you've read it, or at least heard of it. There's a book by Dan Sullivan called The Gap and the Gain. If you haven't read it, definitely
read it.
All the listeners, read anything Dan Sullivan puts out is great. But
yes,
the context, and he'd probably be mad at me. I'd never met him, but he'd probably still be mad at me for trying to summarize it. But any situation, you look at the gap and the gain. So the gap is, woe is me, I never made it, I missed this goal. The gain is, I haven't made it yet, I'm making progress towards this. And I love your analogy of, to get to chapter 30, you got to start at chapter 1, and then you can look back at chapter 1. It's like anything that we do or start off on, this podcast, for example, not the best, but you had to start, and then maybe 5 years down the road, it'll be better. And getting yourself in that mindset again, where you can appreciate. And that's one thing, when I was full of anxiety, I could never see the good in anything, because I wanted, and I love your analogy, I'm going to steal it forever. I wanted chapter 30, but I was just beginning my journey, and there's no way I could have made it there. But really, I should have been like, hey man, you've gotten through halfway through chapter 1. 6 months ago, you didn't even have the book. You didn't even know how to read,
Yeah.
And it's like looking back is so good. And it's so weird how we don't give ourselves, again, going back to that freedom or the permission to do that. And then once you do, be respectful of yourself as well. Be gentle with yourself along the process, because it's going to, I mean, I'm 47. So I started this self journey 5 years ago. that it's 42. I'm great at math. 42 years of moving one way. Of course, it's not going to change overnight.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right. No, and I love it. Before we started recording, you were talking about this podcast and how new it was. And tell that story, tell the story, because I love this so much. And it's such a good example, talking about leadership, right? Like you got to lead by example. And this is one of those where, you didn't it's not like you went to some podcasting school or had somebody like hand you the magic keys. Like you started doing the hard. So tell that story. I love it.
Yeah, well, I mean, because this is the first video podcast, and I don't know what I was doing. So all weekend I was setting up this set, if you will, and working on video. And then this morning I was like, well, I don't know if I can publish this audio, because that's what most of my podcasts are, been just audio, and you can use software. So, this morning I had to make a couple like tapes and then practice it and see if I could put my theme music. So all this learning, I'm even going to say 6 months ago would have stressed me out. I would have been like, oh, I'm never going to do this. I can't figure this out. Knowing that I could, I was just frustrated. And for the easy, hard, it was because I was going after something I didn't really want to do.
Mm.
But this podcast, this conversation, getting this message out and getting different perspectives is truly what I think my purpose in life is now, because I'm very fortunate. I was able to take myself from where I was to today, and I look forward to the years to come and the improvement that's going to come, because it doesn't ever stop. But finding something that I really love and learning this doesn't become a work. It becomes pleasure. I don't sleep like very late in the day. So I was doing all this at 3:40 this morning. So my dog's like looking at me like, who are you talking to at 3:40? And
It was really early.
yeah. And it's like, but it brought me so much joy. There was no anxiety. There was no, and I guess that's the kind of story you wanted to say, because like that's the beauty of giving yourself permission. And going back to when I started the podcast, I think I taped my first one, which is only like 6 or 7 minutes, 40 times.
Yeah.
And it was so, I just hated it. And I'm talking to another coach friend of mine, and he goes, just put it out there. No one's going to care. And boy,
Yeah, don't worry about it.
he was so right. And this brings me to something that you wrote about when you started your newsletter.
Yeah.
You said your purpose was to make an impact, and I'm paraphrasing, and then create freedom in abundance for your family. And you said,
Yeah.
As the only thing that's changed, or not, the mission hasn't changed, but it's only deepened.
Yeah.
And do you find something like that? I mean, I'm going to ask you later what your heart is, but like, was that difficult for you to put out your first newsletter?
So, yeah. Yeah. Short answer, absolutely. It's now thinking back, that's been 4 years ago. Um, it's almost comical how, number one, much time I spent on it. And number two, how nervous I was pushing the send button. And, I have this clear memory. I was using, there's all this email software stuff, has like templates. And so it's like, this is where you put your words. This is where you put your picture. This is where your headline goes. So they make it easy in that way. But you got to fill it all in. Well, I had done all of those things and then missed one of the like boxes to put a picture. So when I sent it, there was like an empty put your picture here box. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Worst day ever, And it was like, who read that email? It was like my mom and like 3 or 4 other people I knew, and nobody said anything and nobody cared. And, the next time was a little better and a little easier and a little easier. And now, my routine for writing those newsletters is really joyful. There's no, nervousness or fear. And throughout the week, I might have this little inspiration. I'll write down notes. And then like when it's, every Thursday morning from like 9 to 11 is my newsletter time. And I just sit down and I just write it, and it's always from my heart. And it's always like a gift on the other end to see like who responds and what they say and what struck them about this. And, um, you know, th- now it's like just joyful, right? But like it had to start ugly and it had to start messy and it had to start with, you know, the discomfort, right? And this is where I think, your easy, hard, and hard, hard theory is so powerful. It felt really hard, you know, but I had that purpose beneath it. I had that mission behind it. So I was willing to do that hard work. I was willing to put myself out there and to sweat through those, moments of discomfort. And will people judge me? And will my friends like roll their eyes at what I'm doing? And it's like all those things are going to be there. But that hard, right? Like enduring that, going through that hard is so much more fulfilling than getting to the end of your life and looking back and having those regrets. And because you went the easy path, right? Because that's, in my mind, that's what the easy hard is, right? We're still going to work. You still have a job, still doing whatever. Um, and it's not always about career for people, right? Sometimes it's about other kinds of steps. But yeah, it was messy. It was very messy. And for a long time. And even now I'm always looking for ways to improve, but it's all joyful now, but it took a while to get there. So,
I love it because I've experienced it and especially as someone who as you know I was in school for so long and you are getting judged on your writing and
oh yeah.
you had to write so I think stepping into like a newsletter where it's like just my opinion, I don't have to quote scholarly journals, all these fun things.
Yes.
But it's so cool because I don't have the pressure. And then I found even like in some weeks I was going to talk about X, but when I sat down to write, something else popped into my head, and it was really cool because I can do X later. Where that's such a great thing, and you said something, and I'm all over the place. That's just how I live my life. But you said something about it. At first, it was discomfort, or there was uncomfortable. I think going back to the anxiety, so much in the culture now, and the self improvement, and especially in the man space it's all suffering. Like you have to suffer to grow. And I was having a conversation yesterday with one of my neighbors and, I don't think you need to suffer, but maybe you do need a little discomfort because when you going after your purpose, you are putting yourself out there. You're shining the light on what you truly believe in. And and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on like especially in the anxiety space because I think like I was a big David Goggins. I mean, he inspired me,
Yes.
and I will never. He's the only celebrity if I ever see in person, I'm going to go talk to because he inspired me to change my life. And but
Oh,
but that whole suffering mentality, either I misread what he was saying or I took it the wrong way. I thought I had to suffer. I had to punish myself. I thought that was the only way out of my anxiety. And sure, a lot of the things I did were uncomfortable at first. I ended up enjoying them. So I'd
yeah.
love to hear, I'm talking too much, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on just that part about suffering versus discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's so much to say about suffering, discomfort, anxiety. Um, I'll give you a quick story. First speaking engagement I ever had, I'm talking to my dad on the way, and he says, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're the anxiety lady. The anxiety lady can't be nervous." And I was like, "No, that's the point, right? We all have these emotions. The difference is I'm not going to be driven by my anxiety, right? Or my nervousness or my fears. Those are, those get to be, parts of me that can give me, it's like an indicator light, right? It's like a guidepost. I feel nervous in this situation because I want to do a good job, right? Not because I shouldn't do it. And that's kind of what anxiety ends up being for a lot of people. It becomes our navigator, right? Our guidepost, right? I feel anxious. That's a sign I should not do this. I should not take that class. I should not sign up for the thing. I should not send the newsletter. And so anxiety wants to like box you in, wants to keep you in that familiar zone. And so what I think, the message from anxiety is that that discomfort is suffering, you know, but it's just discomfort. It's just temporary discomfort and part of the growing process, right? You can't grow staying exactly the same. And so, there are going to be some growing pains and growing discomforts, but that doesn't mean you're suffering. Suffering, you know, from like a Zen perspective, it's a mental decision, right? You could be in something that's hard and uncomfortable, but your mind is solid and calm and strong. And that is just discomfort. But the suffering is I'm in this discomfort and mentally I am like crushing myself. You're an idiot. Why have you shown up here? No one is going to like you. Everyone hates you already, which and it's like there's nothing positive coming from that. So I think there's some physical discomfort, right? Like I think it's just a different in how you think of those words. That's my thought, and I don't have any definitive definitions that I can point to about that, but that's how I see it.
No, that's a great perspective and very interesting, and I especially like how you said how the anxiety, like kind of overtakes you, and it goes into jumping topics. You write about emotional leadership, and your emotions are. I mean, anxiety, I think, is an emotion, just as so is happiness,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, how are you going to allow that to affect you? And I like to say, if you're anxious, you don't want to walk around like that all day. But if you're overly happy, you also don't want to walk around like that all the day. So having its time and its place, but not let it rule your day, I found is one of the most critical elements, because if you're super happy and now you're just kind of mellow, then you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm not super happy. So happiness is bad. And then obviously when you're anxious, or it goes all the way to depression or whatever, the it's the opposite, right? So it's kind of like you got the sine curve. As much as you can stay in the middle and just know your emotion. So that's my interpretation of emotional intelligence. What's your definition, and how do you think it applies to what we've been talking about?
Yeah. Well, so we're getting a lot of inputs all the time that are driving our emotional state. Some of it is, what's going on in our world around us, how we're interacting in our relationships, whether or not we're doing work that feels fulfilling. I mean, there's 100,000 variables, right, that are determining our emotional output. What I find fascinating beyond belief is that this is a two-way street. Our emotions are, kind of feeding our physiology and how our chemicals are being produced in our brain and so on. Um, and often changes our body in ways that we are unaware of, right? So if a person is depressed, like their shoulders usually hunch and they, look down, and, there's like things, and it's like we all know them because like we could look across the room and see somebody and go, well, there's a happy person, or there is a really shy person, or there is a person who has a lot of charisma. And so there are these body language things that kind of come from those emotions, right? But we can go the other direction, right? Because this is the two-way signal. So now if I know, so when I worked at a school, there's never enough time in the day, right? You make a list for the day, and at the end, you're deciding what just needs to be rolled over to the next day. Always, every day, no matter how long I was there. And so there were times where I would catch myself walking really quickly in the hallways because I was trying to get as much done as possible. And I was saying to myself, there's not enough time. I'm not going to get it all done. I've got to hurry. And so all of these inputs, right? The long list, my thoughts, and my physical actions are all feeding that sense of anxiety and overwhelm. And I realized, wait a second, can't control the list, right? It's going to be there. And, but I have some decision-making executive power over my thoughts and my body. And so I slow down my body. I start walking at a normal, confident pace, right? You change your body language, pull your shoulders back. You walk a little more slowly and more intentionally, and now you feel a little bit more of your power come back. And, same thing with your thoughts, right? It's not, I'm never going to get it all done. It's, I have a lot to do and I'm going to do my best. Or I can prioritize the most important needs, and then we're just going to be good with that, right? So you have that control, right? So if you are just letting that emotional state control you, you're missing out on so much of your power. So when I think of executive leadership or emotional leadership, it's always, like you said, leading yourself first. You can't lead a team. You can't be that person unless you're starting with it and you're leading yourself first. And where we get our most power is like understanding how all of that works together and what we do have control over, and taking action in those ways.
Wow. That's so cool. And it's spot on. It's I love hearing the way other people describe kind of the same thing I've been thinking about, because I've really been delving into like kind of the Stoics and what they said. And of course the whole thing is, control what you can. And, if you really take stock of what you can control on a day-to-day basis, it might be 1%, 2% of everything that happens in your life. Yeah. And of course, a lot of people say you can choose to be happy or you can choose to be angry or whatever. I think a lot of people need to learn what choice is and learn that control. And again, with someone with anxiety, it's going to be harder to learn that lesson, but just knowing that you can do that and just slowing yourself down or becoming aware. I've recently just started writing 3 things down I want to do every day. And if I get those 3 things done, then I'm happy with it. And if I get the 4th or 5th done, that's a bonus. And then some days I get to the 3 and I just stop. Well, for me, that's been valuable because I always was pushing. And then, at the end of the day, I got my 3 done, but I didn't get 4, 5, 6 done. I dwell on those 3. Why? That wasn't the way I started the day. So, my emotional intelligence, my anxiety, everything was fueled by something that I can control, these 3 things. And let's say I don't get the 3 things done, then who cares, right? I mean, they can roll over. There's no hard and fast rule. I'm the one that creates them, right?
I made the rule.
Yeah. It's funny how many rules we make for ourselves that like just destroy us. We all have obligations and all that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking addiction.
Right.
But
yeah.
Well, that is super cool, and I want to be, I've got so many more things I could talk to you, but it was probably at a point where we've talked about anxiety, we talked about emotional intelligence, we talked about following your purpose. Yeah. Any last point you'd like to bring up to kind of put a bow on this, and
Yeah. Well, I mean, just because we're talking about anxiety, I want to say, in my work and in my study in that in particular, what I've found is that there are really 3 components to being able to manage your anxiety, to be able to feel in control of it. And one is the cognitive side, right? That training your brain, the thoughts, that whole process, learning to focus on what you can control on, right? So those types of things, that's that's one piece of the puzzle. And I think the reason so many people come to me and they're like, I have tried therapy and I've tried medication and I've tried all these things and it hasn't worked is because so much is heavy on that side of it. There's so much of what we've learned about managing anxiety is just in that cognitive realm. And so if we stop there, we're missing 2/3 of the puzzle. And so my anxiety detox course focuses on all three, which is the cognitive strategies. The second are the physical, body-based, somatic practices or trauma healing. Like all of that is another category because this is feeding this and your body is feeding your mind, right? Like it's going back and forth. And then the third piece, and this is the one that just blindsides a lot of people, is gut health. So we, we talk about mental health and physical health as two completely different fields. But like you can't separate them. And the more we study gut health, the more we understand that if your gut is disrupted, it's going to send signals to your brain that you're in crisis and you're going to feel more anxious. And if you're anxious, your gut isn't going to do its job the right way. You're not going to be able to absorb nutrients the way that you need to. You're going to have inflammation and problems that come from that. And so really the true total freedom from anxiety is having all three, learning and practicing all three of those. And so anyway, I hope that puts a bow on all the things that we've talked about.
It puts a bow and it opens a box on so many things that now I really want to talk to you about it. And hopefully we can have you back because I do think that mind-body connection and then the gut health, which fortunately is starting to come in the forefront in the medical and I mean, I haven't talked about this a lot, but I'm a huge proponent of like functional health and finding the right foods. And I mean, there's these like almonds, for example. There's some physical reaction when I eat almonds that make me instantly anxious. Well, I learned that from a blood test and now I avoid almonds. And every so often I'll try them again just to see, because sometimes the gut, they say it takes 60 to 90 days, it'll repair itself. Well, it hasn't. So like, that's just something that like I found, which is small, but at the same time, it's a very critical, I think, and I'd love to because that whole health side of it is part of my journey.
Yeah.
But again, it's something that I'm not medically qualified to talk about. But I've done a lot of personal biohacking, if you will. But that's beautiful. So cognitive, body, and gut health, and I mean the science shows that too. I mean, why do people say sleep on it or go with your gut feeling? I mean, there is, and I think a lot of times for the anxiety, it does leave your brain. Sometimes goes to your gut, but it can come back up. And having that, like what you were talking about earlier, I didn't write the acronym down. The help me.
EMDR.
EMDR. I think that's really good because maybe it separates the two and allows you to then go. But no, that's fantastic. So I do. But before I ask my wrap up question, tell, and I'll put all this in the show notes, but tell the listeners where they can find you and get some of this content if they want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's staceybrake.com, STACEYBRAKE, just like the brake on a car. And on there's a free guide that people can download, 4 Steps to Freedom from High Functioning Anxiety, so that you can get that toolkit, you can get that guide right away. It helps you track, what are you seeing, what's happening in your anxiety on a daily basis, which is really the first step, right? You've got to have that awareness of where you are. So that's there. I'm on LinkedIn, Stacey Brake, and I also have a Facebook page, Stacey Brake Coaching. And I'd love to see you there. Love to connect. I love to answer questions or just, share stories. And it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. So before we close, and I got to have one question because every podcast does. What is your current hard work that you're doing?
Yeah. First of all, I love that you have that question, and this is such a perfect question. Um, so mine is my current is this. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary. So we've been married for 20 years, and my husband and I are very introspective. We talk a lot. We're best friends, we're very, very close. And our question, at the 20-year mark was like, how do we go deeper? How do we, connect more as a team? How do we, you know, build even more and grow even more? And thinking ahead, we've got two teenage boys. And so, we're on like the short timeline of like, it won't be that much longer before it's just us again. And so we want to, do that hard work now of, you know, having our relationship where we want it to be when it's just us again. And so um, just also believing that that connects to everything else we do, right? To my mission, to my work, to the business, and to how we raise our kids. And so that's my hard.
Wow, that is fantastic, and I wish you all the best on that one, because that's and that's what hard is all about. Is it matters to you, and a lot of people think, oh, it's my work, my 9 to 5. No, it can be your relationships in this case, and we can all. And that's great that you have a partner, because in coaching, accountability is key. So that's great that you're on the same sheet of music. That's beautiful. But well, wow, you really unpacked a lot of really cool things and gave a different perspective today. And I definitely appreciate your time. And you will always be, maybe one day on a Jeopardy question, who was the first guest on it? It will never be that, but it'll be you.
I hope it is. I hope it is. I'm cheering for that question on Jeopardy for both of us. That's so cool.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for your insights, and I appreciate it. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for your work and for having me here. This has been such a joy and such a treat. And I'll come back and talk to you anytime. So
Awesome.
let's do it again.
All right. Have a great day.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you found it as enjoyable and learned something from it as I did. If you found this podcast specifically relevant, please share it with someone. Let's get the word out that there is hope. There is a way out of anxiety. There is a way to find our hard and stop chasing the easy hard work. Please follow the Easy Hard versus Hard podcast. And if you would like to get my newsletter, I'll drop the Substack link below. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. And I will also link all the ways you can get in contact with Stacey in the show notes. So please reach out to her. And again, I just want to thank her for her time and for giving of herself so we can all learn and become better humans. As always, I'm Bobby Shelton. I hope until next time, you chase the hard work and find the work that actually matters to you.